everyone, this is Daniel Gray, and welcome to the Discover Leadership Podcast, where I'll be interviewing some of today's leaders, best-selling authors, pastors, preachers, and entrepreneurs. Each conversation is designed to help us discover how we can become better leaders today. Hey everyone, welcome to the Discover Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Gray, and on today's episode, I'm talking with Pastor Michael Turner. Pastor Michael Turner is the founding and lead pastor of Turning Point Church with campuses in Covington and McDonough, Georgia. Michael is known for his relevant teaching style, his passion for building strong God-first families, and his heart to see the fatherless restored. Pastor Michael released his first book called Watch Me Daddy, The Cry of Generations, which speaks to the fatherless crisis in our culture and how God is restoring generations. He and his wife, Charla, have 3 children and live in McDonough, Georgia, where they launched Turning Point Church in 2003. Okay, listeners, here we go. Pastor Michael Turner. Pastor Michael, thank you for taking the time to do this. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, Daniel, thank you so much, man, for having me on. It's an honor. I'm excited and just thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I want to jump right into it. And I think one of the greatest questions I could ask a leader like yourself, Pastor Michael, you have a lot going on. I mean, from the outside perspective, it seems like with a very large church and multiple locations, reaching thousands of people, got a huge staff. You've also authored some books and you're writing books now, I know, and traveling to conferences and meetings. The list could go on. And plus, you also have a beautiful family with a wife and 3 kids. So the golden question, I think, for a leader who wants to know how do you hold up all together is the balance question. And so with the church and with all the things outside of the church and with a family that your family's amazing, how do you balance it all?
Well, that's a great question, Daniel. And I think that's one that we all kind of think about, want to understand, and I think we just resolve the fact that it's not a problem to be solved. It's just a tension to be managed. And so I think for me personally, now having been a senior pastor for 16 years, just celebrated 21 years of marriage. I have 3 teenagers.
Wow.
It's been finding out the rhythm. I think knowing your unique wiring, because everybody's wired different, and especially with your spouse, it's finding out both of your wirings, both of your personalities. It's about the rhythm of how you flow. Are you a morning person, and are you a late night person? Like, it's understanding the flow of when you're most productive, and when it comes to balance, honestly, Daniel, I don't think balance is a biblical term. I don't think it's a biblical principle. I don't think you can find it. I've tried, and I cannot find balance anywhere. But what I do see is a season of intensity followed by rest. And so when you follow that, there's the Sabbath principle, and God created, then He rested. And in the Jewish culture, I had a gentleman tell me that in their culture, they work basically 6 12-hour days, which is intense. And then they have that Sabbath, but they honor that Sabbath. And that allows them to kind of reboot, refocus, refocus their life, re-energize their spirit. And so it's basically making sure that you're not going all the time, because when you do have ambition and you want to fulfill God's plan and purpose for your life, for your family, you have big dreams, you're ambitious, you can really go. And a lot of guys go, and they don't have that plan. They don't know their rhythm. They're trying to keep up with somebody else. If you look at some of these highly effective leaders, and some of them are very disciplined, but I've also met some others, Daniel, who are very different. They, some of the guys get up at 5 a.m. Some guys go to bed at 2 a.m. And I think it's just finding your rhythm and how you can be most productive. But I think for me, it's that plan. It's the rhythm of work, but it's also making sure that I've calendared time with the family, sitting around the table. I tell people all the time, if you tell your kids it's time to eat and they go jump in the van, they're so used to eating fast food. you probably need to make sure that you are gathering around the table, taking good breaks. Our kids know that we go hard, and if it's around Christmas or Easter, they know mom and dad, they're going to be going hard. We don't get to celebrate Easter and Christmas quite like everybody else on the same day because of the multiple services over multiple days. And so it's just kind of helping them understand that rhythm as well, so that they know what we're about, but still making them feel special and more important than ministry. And then making sure that you're taking those breaks. For us, I had a guy tell me early on in ministry the importance of finding your rhythm, but making sure that you break. So every 3 to 4 months, probably every 4 months, consistently, we take a week and we just stop. We don't do ministry. I don't watch online. I don't watch the service on Sunday and then send coaching tips on how they can get better. I don't even watch church. I just focus on the family. But I think for the rhythm and the health of longevity, it's just making sure that you're calendaring time with your wife, the date night, doing the annual trip with her. And I think for me, that's what's caused us to kind of be healthy and to be able, I think, to pace ourselves to finish strong. So that's kind of where we're at. And again, it's just the tension you're managing. I don't think you'll ever solve that problem.
Oh man, and that's the best way I think you could say it, is that you won't solve it. It's a tension that you'll always manage. That's so good.
Yeah.
I think I heard years ago, I heard, that reminds me of something, I believe it was Andy Stanley talked about choosing to cheat. And he said that we all have to choose to cheat somewhere, that in seasons you're going to say, hey, it's the same concept that you're sharing is, that in some seasons I'm going to cheat on my golf game because I'm going to be really intentional with time that I have that's free with my family because I'm going to be really busy. And that's really awesome. Just kind of knowing what season you're in and knowing the rhythm. I love that you shared that. And with rhythm, one of the things I like to ask pretty much every guest that comes on the show, speaking of rhythm, is there a morning routine that you have as a leader with all these things that are going on, all these plates you're spinning around you? Is there something that no matter what is different? Are there things that no matter what you do every day, the same thing? Yeah. And I think that for me, that's the greatest victory and the greatest win for the day is how you start your day. And, I think for me, where I'm at right now, I wake up and I definitely get up before everybody else, before it gets crazy. Because when the house starts moving and rolling and rocking, it's tough to really pull away. But for me, it's making sure that I am creating that space every morning. But I start out with positive thoughts and then positive confessions. Just positive, grateful confessions, just really starting my day out with positivity, because I believe that sets a tone for my day. Well, talk about that. What do you actually do when you say you make confessions? When does that happen? What does that look like for you?
Well, I think for me, I open my eyes, and the first thing that I've disciplined myself to do is to, instead of thinking about all the things that I do, I think about all the things that I get to do. And it's really kind of a not a to-do list, but a get-to-do list. But I'll begin to think about, number one, hey, I'm alive.
Yeah.
Thank God I'm on the right side of the dirt. Thank you for another day of life. Thank you, Father, for another day to serve you, to grow. And then I'll just go through some confessions and things that I'm wanting to speak over my life to kind of program what's going to matter today and what's most important. And that just kind of sets a tone, because it's impossible to be stressed and grateful at the same time. And so practicing gratitude, but then faith confessions in the morning about focus and vision. And, for instance, I'll talk about, I'm going to love God today. I'm going to love people. I'm going to love my wife as Christ loves the church. I'm going to train up my children and father them and encourage them. And they're going to be, they're going to be raised on the path, and when they're old, they won't depart. So I just kind of go through these scriptures about growing in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. And so and obviously I get my coffee, is there life before coffee?
Amen.
But that's kind of how I start my day. And I'm even getting some time now where I just get quiet. And I'm really learning the power of imaging what I want to see myself achieving, whether it's goals or whether it's my kids. So that's kind of where I'm at in my mornings right now, is really getting quiet and getting my mind still and then beginning to see the images and the pictures of the things that I want. So that's kind of how my mornings start, and I think that's really helped me be the husband and the leader by the time everybody gets up that I need to be. So, yeah.
Wow, Pastor Michael, you said something that just stuck out there that I don't know that I've ever heard anyone put it that way, or at least in our conversation, you've never said that to me, but it stuck out when you said imaging it. And I think about how, most people know that a lot of professional athletes will they visualize things before they do it. That's why golfers will take a practice swing where they're actually seeing in their mind, most of them, they're visualizing what's going to happen. But the greatest golfers, I recently was reminded of this. I heard a guy talking about this. The greatest golfers, their sports psychologists will actually train them to go through getting quiet, getting still. And this is not they're not pastoring them. They're just talking about visualization to get into a place and to see themselves not only winning the tournament, not only hitting shots, but winning the tournament. And so they visualize themselves lifting up the trophy that they won. They visualize shaking the hand of the person that's going to, they actually go through that whole thing. Wow. And I thought, man, that's so powerful. But these concepts are right in the scriptures that, whatever you think, that's what a man becomes. And I'm just curious to know, the reason why I'm on this is because I'm trying to know practically, what is it that you mean when you're getting quiet? And I kind of know, but for our listeners, I want to know what it is that you're actually doing, because a lot of our listeners, they are ambitious and they have goals and they have dreams. And I was speaking with some young leaders recently who all of them shared one common thing, that they had lots of ideas and lots of things that they were passionate to start, and that they were going to do this, but then it faded and it didn't happen. Yeah. So maybe help some of us with how what does that mean, imaging? What does that mean for you?
Well, I think it's first identifying what it is that you're believing for. I think when it comes to, having dreams and having desires for your marriage, for your family, many times, Daniel, people, they want stuff in life, but they've never taken the time to really determine and articulate and define what it is they want. When Jesus encountered blind Bartimaeus, he came up to him and Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And it seemed pretty obvious. I mean, Bartimaeus is blind. Right. What's the deal, Jesus? Well, he wanted Bartimaeus to define what it was that he wanted. And I think that's the way God is. Sometimes we're just believing for big things, but going back to the imaging thing, what is it that you're believing for? That's what I asked our staff yesterday. What is it that you're believing for? What is it right now that you're believing for? And do you believe it? Because you need to be able to see the picture in your mind and really have that belief in your heart. Like, it's not just this false hope, but it's literally an image or a picture. So for me, I'm in the place, Daniel, to get back to the question is, let's take my kids, for example. They're teenagers. They're in, I've got an 18-year-old. He's about to graduate. I've got a 10th grader, 9th grader, and just really trying to help them find their purpose, their wiring, their calling, their next step, and that can be a challenge. So what I'm doing is I am picturing them in my mind as I pray for them. I'm praying. I'm seeing them pursuing God. I'm seeing them saying yes to the call of God. I'm seeing them full and not distracted by the things of this world. I'm seeing them flourishing and joyful. So that's just a small practical thing that I've been doing for them with myself, seeing myself succeeding in the goals that I have, whether it's through writing, as you said, finishing the books, and continuing to plant campuses, lead leaders, and even coaching now that I've gotten into, just seeing myself really flourishing in those things and seeing that happen. So I think that for me is just a practical piece to kind of answer your question that I'm putting into place and putting into practice, because it is a powerful thing, and it helps you to really begin to move towards it, and seeing that like Abraham, I'm going to make you, your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky. Well, look up Abraham. He's imaging. He was helping him see that even when he didn't have a kid yet. And so I think that's something that we miss as leaders. I know that I've not always put that into practice, but just recently have God's brought that back to me just in my own personal time, but then also through reading a great book, classic book, The Power of Positive Thinking. He talks extensively about that in there, and it's really resonated within me. So that's one thing that I think that a part of my day is looking like right now that has brought some powerful results.
That's amazing. I just think it's so powerful, the concept of imaging and seeing that image in your mind, and I don't know that this is necessarily connected, but as you're sharing, I can't help. I'm just sitting here thinking about the scripture that says that set your mind, it talks about setting your mind on things above, not earthly things, but just the idea that we can set our mind first thing in the morning on what we don't really see yet, but we're going to, in our mind, we're going to set our mind on it. And it's just so powerful. You mentioned a book there. What was that book?
It was The Power of Positive Thinking.
Okay. Do you know who the author is?
Yeah, it's Vincent Peale, I believe is his name.
Okay.
It's an older book, but it's The Power of Positive Thinking. It's a classic book it's Norman Vincent Peale. And
got it.
It's The Power of Positive Thinking. I mean, it's just it's gold. It's powerful. So that's really helping with the power of imaging and even having peace and getting quiet.
Yes.
And meditation and tranquility, and it's really a powerful thing that I think sometimes in our noisy, busy, ambitious culture that we don't realize the value of that, because it feels like a waste of time when it's actually one of the most important things you can do. It's probably one of the most important works you can do when it comes to achieving your potential and, not only having success, but significance. And I think, so.
That's powerful. Since you mentioned that book, I always like to ask our guests what book or books have most impacted you, and that could be a recent book, or that could be just a life book that you're saying, hey, this is the book that sticks out. So some have said one, some have said multiple, but these are books that I would say this is a book that you'd want to give to somebody. Like, it impacted you so much you wanted to go and give it to someone else or tell someone about it. Do you have a book that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think with me, I always try to make sure that I'm reading books in different areas of my life, both personally and professionally. With the professional organizational leadership mind, I would say a book by Les McEwen called Predictable Success just talks about identifying the growth, the growth levels and the different streams of growth, of the different levels that growth organizations go through. A cycle is what I was for. So that was huge organizationally for our churches. Our church grew really fast from 2012 to 2016, and just walking through the process, understanding how to get to predictable success. So I would say for organizational leadership, predictable success was huge. Just for personal leadership, I think what comes to my mind is John Gordon is an author. He wrote the book Energy Bus.
Yep.
He wrote Power of Positive Leadership, The Power of Positive Team. So for me, those books are ones that I pass on to leaders and pastors because it's transformational, defining your culture, values, optimism, belief, connection of your team. So for me, those have been just powerful within the last year or so. So those are probably ones that come to my mind in the area of leadership and organization. So.
That's awesome. Those are all great books. I'm making sure I got them all jotted down as well. That's great. Well, I also would like to ask, since you're not only a reader, but you're also a writer, and I know you're an author, how a lot of our listeners are aspiring leaders, and many of whom I'm sure have considered writing a book. And so, since you're an author and you've written a book, I've always been intrigued to ask this question: how does someone know if they should write a book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that your voice and your message, your life message. I think every person needs to write a book about their life message. Bishop Bronner, who's a mentor and a voice in my life, he told me years ago, he said, in the Jewish culture, Michael, there's 3 things that they say that every person should do to leave a legacy in the earth after they leave it. And that was to plant a tree, have a child, and write a book.
Wow.
And so that kind of was the beginning for me of identifying what is my life message. And actually the book that I wrote, it came to a point, Daniel, where I had just kind of collected stories, had thoughts, and began to see a theme from my own background and my own past as a current need and situation in our culture. But then there came a point where this thing had been going on for 3 or 4 years. I mean, it was just kind of an idea that I talked about. I kind of put some stuff together. It was just kind of in the queue. And then it felt like the Lord gave me a mandate. And it was kind of like, I'm accountable to write this book. Like, I need to get this, regardless of what the book does, I've got to do my part to get it into the earth. And I think that for me was my motivator. But I'm actually writing 2 other books right now, and hopefully
2 other books.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh man, that's exciting. Well, you don't have to give us all the details, but is there anything you could tell us about it?
Yeah, I think that 2 other areas. The first book I wrote on was about growing up without a father voice, and how to overcome fatherlessness and being restored as a son, and learning how to find your identity. Finding your identity as a son in the earth, and anyway. So I talk about that in the first book I wrote, Watch Me Daddy. But the next book is really about another life message. It's based on the core values of our church at Turning Point House. We just completed a really great series, but during that series preparation, God told me to really dig in and expand and define what it means to be about the house. And I just love that term, house. It's always resonated within me. Jesus said, passion for your house consumes me. David said that. And I really honestly have a passion for the local church, and how in our culture today, in America, only 9% of Americans actually are faithfully attending a local church. And I want to make sure that I am casting vision and inspiring people to value the local church, to value Sunday. And here's why. Here's why our families needs to. Here's why the next generation. The local church is the hope of the world, and I will spend my life serving it and championing it. And so I just felt compelled to write a book about it. It's not going to be a huge book, probably 150 pages, but I felt like, Daniel, that if I write this, it's actually a resource that pastors could use to give to, new members, new guests.
Yeah.
Just really helping us in America value and building the house of God. And so, because I do believe it's the hope of the world, and I just think everybody ought to be a part of the house, So that's one. And then the other one is just about generosity. It's called Space Makers. A couple of years ago, was just thinking about the power of a seed and how they actually go into your future. They leave your hand, but they go into your future, and they actually create space in your future so that when you show up into your future, it's waiting for you. And so the harvest is in your future.
That's powerful.
And it just talks about the idea of a seed and why we need to be sowers. And create the future that we want. So
that's awesome.
So
I can't wait.
Those are in the pipeline.
Well, I have your other book already on my bookshelf, so I just need the other 2.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that.
That's awesome. I can't wait. Hey, I want to ask this question, kind of the format of our show, we jump right in and we start going into questions. But I want to ask you, because, I know, Pastor Michael, the impact that Turning Point Church has made here in the Atlanta area, in McDonough, Henry County, now in Covington. I feel like everyone in Henry County, Georgia, which is where your church is located, knows who you are, knows about your church. And I have personally attended and been to your services several times, and I'm always blown away by the excellence and by how many people keep coming through the doors for every worship experience, every service you guys do. So, I'm just like one of your biggest fans, and that's why I wanted you on the show. And I know a lot of our listeners, absolutely, and I mean that, a lot of our listeners our young leaders who are in ministry, and I'm sure some of them have considered or maybe have felt like, or eventually will really feel the feeling of pastoring a church, or maybe even planting a church, starting a church from the ground up, like you and your wife Charla did many years ago. And so I know now Turning Point is is it 15, 16 years old now? 15, 16?
Yeah, we just celebrated 16 years this past March.
Congrats. 16. It's time to drive. You got the keys now.
Yeah, man.
That's awesome. Well, the church has just made such a huge impact. And all generations, and just an incredible church. I'm always sharing with people, hey, if you're around the South Atlanta area, you got to go check out Turning Point Church.
Yeah.
So for these young leaders who are seeing these churches, and I mentioned, I think in a conversation with you recently, that a lot of young leaders see the success stories of young pastors, young leaders. The success of Stephen Furtick so quickly, who was a young, dynamic, and different creative communicator. The church was different, and recently a friend of mine, Pastor Mike Todd, has exploded on social media. His church is growing, and I know for you, Pastor Michael, I know back during you mentioned there was a time period where you guys were growing so rapidly, and I know you guys were on the list of the fastest growing churches in America that year. So with leaders like those other dynamic leaders like yourself, and you're reaching so many, not just in the church but in the community, making such a huge impact. So our ears are wide open. We want to know, for someone who's made such a huge impact, for someone who wants to start a church, for someone that feels like maybe they're called to be a pastor, what advice will you give us?
Wow. Well, I think with regards to being a pastor and wanting to plant a church, I think that's an incredible call. I think that it's an honor, it's a privilege, and I believe when God begins to stir your heart for that, that it is Him pulling, it is Him inviting, and but I also believe that that's a big decision, and you just got to make sure that you filter through selfish ambition and sanctified ambition, because sometimes we feel like the only place we can make a difference is if we have a platform. We've got a voice to be heard, and I think that in the early on of that thought process, it's just making sure that you are filtering that, because you can look at some of the guys. I heard Christine Kane say one time that people think she's an overnight success, and she says 23 years is a long night.
Right.
And how she served in the local church. She drove a van for the students. She went through the internship. She used to set up the food in the green room, and how just even through all that, how important it is to embrace your place in the house that you're in.
That's amazing.
Because I do believe, Daniel, with all my heart, that the local church is the field from which God will blossom and bring forth good things out of your life. That's where you're going to flourish from. I think it's the platform to be launched out of. And so for me, if you are considering being a pastor, it's making sure that you are a part of the house, that you are under authority, that you have leadership, you have voices in your life, because you don't want to do it alone. 80% of churches, when they start, within 5 years, they're done. Already 1,300, I think, a month. I think I heard one stat, 1,300 a month resignations already in America.
Wow.
90% of churches are in decline. Thousands every year are shutting their doors. So I don't mean to be doggy downer, but it's understanding that it's not a call to be famous, it's a call to be faithful. And I think sometimes we see that, we want their platform, but we don't realize the price that they pay. And we don't realize the load that they carry. I remember Bishop Bronner told me that when I was getting ready to plant and I was getting his counsel. He's an overseer, been a father voice in my life, and I was an associate. And as I was getting ready to entertain launching a church, obviously through my pastor's agreement and blessing, but just getting his wisdom, he talked about how so many times when you're on staff at a church, maybe you're a youth pastor, maybe you're an associate pastor, young adult pastor, you look at the senior pastor and sometimes you could think, I could do that. Well, you just got to realize you can do that. But he said something to me that stuck with me, Daniel. He said, the word glory is kabod, and it means weightiness. And he said, you got to realize there's a different glory. When you're the lead pastor, there's a different glory. There's a different weightiness, a different heaviness. And if you're not geared and wired and anointed to carry that, it'll crush you.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's the heart. It's got to be the heart. It's got to be the why. And then once you obviously filter through that, get wise counsel, have voices in your life, be under leadership, and then making sure that you don't do it alone. Be a part of a tribe. We've been a part of the ARC for a decade now, since 2009, which they train and assess and actually resource pastors. So we did not do it the ARC way. We did it the hard way. And so for me, that's probably where I would start, Daniel, is getting them to make sure that they're planted in a local church, make sure that they've filtered their heart, that it is sanctified ambition, not selfish ambition, that they're not going out here to be famous, but they're going out here to make Jesus famous and be faithful.
Yeah.
And not feel like there's a pressure to be in a race. There's not a pressure to compare. There's not a pressure to have a certain amount of people. Because recently, I'll share this. I was reading a book by, I think his name is Larry Osborne, and he wrote a book called Leading Like a Shepherd. And he said a statement in there that really helped me. He said, we're not accountable for the amount of sheep that we pastor, but we are accountable for the quality of how we pastor the sheep that were entrusted to us. And so it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is making sure that your heart is for people. Your heart is to advance the kingdom. Your heart is to lay your life down. And then you have great counsel. You're blessed by the leadership of your church, that you study systems that work. I mean, so many churches, Daniel, spend the first several years trying to find their identity. They're trying to find what works. So I would say, do the due diligence, get connected in a great place like ARC, where they can help get you the systems and the structures that are proven, that work, and then be focused on that. But then I think just getting the blessing of the leadership you're under, so that you're being sent. You didn't just get up and decide, I just got up and went. Well, I think you need to be blessed and sent out. And so for me, I think that's probably the advice that I would give looking back. Leaders,
Pastor Michael, I want to just ask about that. I mean, for you, was there because sometimes I think, young leaders just want to know, okay, if there's a right way to do this, what's the right way? Maybe I'll ask two questions in one here. Is there a right way and a wrong way to start a church or plant a church or get started, pursuing that? Is there a right way and a wrong way? And then also for you, when you talk about, being blessed and being sent, for you, what did that look like for you? And how did you deal with that transition?
Sure. Yeah, I think to answer the first question, obviously there's a right way and a wrong way. I think the right way is that you've gone with the blessing of your sending church, that you have done the due diligence to get the systems, to understand the structure, to really take time to filter through that, and have gone through the process of getting, so that you launch healthy. That would be the right way. The right way is to launch healthy, because you would think, well, man, I can preach, just give me a microphone, and that's not going to cause you to be successful. I was around guys in the circle that I was in, and they could preach phenomenally. The anointing, the worship was amazing, but the churches weren't growing. The churches were stuck. And so when it came time for when God began to stir my heart, I'll tell you how that started. I was at a conference for my pastor, at an outreach conference. I was actually in another city, and there was about 2,000 pastors there. This bishop gets up. He says, hey, I want to honor all the senior pastors today. If you're a senior pastor here today, would you go ahead and stand up? We'd like to honor you. And probably 300, 400 guys stood up. And I looked around the room, and I was like, this is awesome. I'm clapping. And I just felt like the Lord said to me, Daniel, what keeps you from being able to stand up? And the answer to that question was me. because I didn't see myself as a senior pastor. And so that kind of started this provoking thought from God. It's almost like coming to Gideon. Hey, you mighty man of valor. Who, me? Yeah. And so I kind of took that to the Lord in prayer and just began to dream about that. I've been a youth pastor for 5 years. My pastor had asked me to be the associate, turn that over, so I did that. And I got ready to I quit preaching, so I was journaling. And my pastor put the book in my hands, Purpose Driven Church by Rick Warren. This is probably 2000.
Okay.
And anyway, so I started reading that, and understanding, hey, man, I feel like God's called me to reach people. Like I want to have a church and be a part of a church that's not only spirit empowered, but is strategic in reaching people and taking turf for God. Like I want this thing to advance. And anyway, so I took that and just began to read that. And my pastor at the time came and asked me, hey, has God been talking to you about a church? And I was like, yeah, actually he has. And so we took that to what was then the overseer of the house, which was actually his father who had founded the church. So we take that to him. And he did not feel I was ready. He said, I think, because I've been in ministry 6 years. I've been saved. I've been in ministry for 5 years, and I'd been saved for 5 years. Mm-hmm. So it was really fast for me. And he said, I don't think you're ready. It will bless you. We'll take an offering and start in your living room. And that's not really what I thought. I felt like I was supposed to be planted. I felt like there was supposed to be more strategy. There's supposed to be some more investment to really make this thing launch and take off the way it should. Well, he didn't feel that way. And in the moment, I felt very hurt. I felt like, he doesn't believe in me. I felt for a moment I felt rejected, but I remembered that as a son, orphans, when they get corrected, it feels like rejection. But now as a son, I realized that that rejection is not rejection. Yeah. I'm sorry, that correction isn't rejection. That correction is protection.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I was able to trust in the voice of who was my spiritual father at the time, even though I felt like I had a word from God, even though my pastor agreed and came into, I guess, confirmed that. I knew God was doing something, but because the ultimate voice in my life didn't see it, I submitted to that and I laid it down for a year. Wow. And I just decided I'm going to go back. I'm going to build the house. So I was building, first impressions. I was getting to do the offering. I was still leading, and about a year later, we were having a missions conference, and I just remember this missionary from India. There's probably, 30, 40 pastors there, a few hundred people in the house. Well, he starts prophesying. And he doesn't understand American protocol when it comes to giving prophecies. And thank God. In other words, he didn't get permission. He wasn't like, Pastor, may I? He was just like, boom, thus says the Lord.
Wow.
And he called me out. And he says, the Lord says, I want you to look back in the 80s. And that's when I walked away from God, was in the 80s. And he says, I want you to know I was with you. And I walked with you. We entered into 2000 together. And I'm about to remove your feet from this place. I'm going to cause you to walk out of this place to start a new work. And there are people who are hiding. I'm going to bring them out from their hiding places. And I'm going to bring them to you for me, because I've given you a ministry of souls. And I'm calling you to start a new church. So there's this big prophetic word, and my spiritual father at the time, the overseer of my life, was there. He heard it, and so he blessed it. And man, they allowed us to launch. We had about 30 days to prepare, which we know today that's definitely not enough time. So we started, but at least they supported me for the first 6 months financially. So that was a huge weight. We started in a house. And just gathered 18 adults in a house. And so that's how the story began, the dream began. But I said all that to say I was tested. The word of the Lord, the Bible says, will be tested. And I had a word from God, and it was being tested. Could I trust God and trust the voices in my life? Even though I could have went I would have rather have been blessed and sent. And I think that ultimately, Daniel, but even though I didn't know all of the ups and downs and the ins and outs, I'd not been trained. I wasn't, a trained church planner. I'd not gone through workshops. I'd not, none of those things were available at the time to my knowledge, but I was blessed by God, and I was blessed by the house I was sent. And I really believe that was the X factor. That was the catalyst that allowed us to grow at some level those first years until I could find the growth systems over at Church of the Highlands. And, anyway, so that's kind of the story of how we launched, and just learning that this is what I would say to young church planners: make sure that you've got those voices in your life, and that you are trusting in them, because you know that God speaks to you through those voices, that God is actually leading you through those voices, and they're not there to restrict you. They're there to help you to get to a place you could never get to on your own. And so in order to be trusted with authority, you've got to be under authority. And I think God tests us with that delegated authority that we're under, so that we can carry it later. Because now that I think that I passed that test, I believe it gave me an authority and a confidence and a godfidence, so that when I'm coaching and leading others who are in my downline, per se, I know that I'm leading from a healthy place. I'm not trying to control, but it's really a God ordained thing. So I think maybe that would be my encouragement.
That's so good. You shared so much there that I think it's almost like you get all this wisdom in one answer to a question that years of learning and walking through things. But what sticks out is that you just handled it the right way. Because I feel like young leaders a lot of times are the most zealous leaders, and we'll just want to go because we feel like God said it, God gave us the dream, and we're going to just bust down every wall we have to bust down. But that's not biblical. And God shows us that we humble ourselves and we trust Him in His timing. And if we humble ourselves, He'll exalt us. But the idea of trying to always push your agenda over authority is what started sin in the first place. That's what got Lucifer kicked out, and that's where pride and sin came in. So it's so foundational. Pastor Michael, I just want to say, I know you wouldn't share this, but you started with 18 people in a living room, and 16 years later on Easter, how many people were at your church?
We had a little over 4,500.
Wow.
For Easter. So, yeah.
Congratulations.
It was a great day. Yeah, man.
Because that's 4,500 people hearing the gospel message of Jesus on that day. I was at one of them, and it was incredible. Your church is making such a huge impact. And I just think, so many of our listeners are going to continue to hear your name and see your name. And I just am so thrilled that you're bringing this leadership acumen and that you have from building a church to young leaders. Thank you for taking the time to do this. It's been absolute gold. So helpful, so encouraging. I can't thank you enough. It's been awesome. I love you and I appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Honor, and I'm so excited, so proud of you. We love you and your family, man. You guys are awesome. We're so excited to be able to align with you in this season and to make a difference for Jesus. But thank you for putting out this podcast. Thank you for what you're doing. I really believe it's going to help young leaders go further faster. So, man, thank you so much for having me on today. It was a blessing.
All right, that's it for this episode. I'll be back soon with more great conversations. If you're enjoying the show, do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and leave a comment on the podcast. Your feedback helps me to connect with you guys, as well as get this content heard by others so that they can discover these great leadership insights from some of the greatest leaders anywhere today. See you next time on Discover Leadership.